Welcome everybody to our first Performance and Accountability Board. Welcome to those in the room and those watching either live online or indeed watching back at a later time. What we're going to do to start with is just go around the table to introduce ourselves, and we'll go clockwise after me. So I am Mark Shelford, the elected Avon and Somerset Police and Crime Commissioner.
And I'm Sarah Crew, Chief Constable.
Good afternoon, Nikki Watson, Deputy Chief Constable.
Good afternoon, Paul Butler, Chief Finance Officer for the PCC.
Good afternoon, Sally Fox, Deputy Chief of Staff for the PCC's office.
Amanda Strictly, Chief of Staff to the PCC.
Thank you. As Police and Crime Commissioner, two of my key roles are to engage with the public about policing and to hold the Chief Constable to account for delivering efficient and effective policing. I've started this board with those two responsibilities very much in mind. Although there's always been a board where I scrutinise the performance of the police, I wanted to hold this in public to make the process more transparent and accessible for all. I want everybody to be able to see, hear and judge for themselves how Avon and Somerset Police are performing. There'll be four parts to this board. First of all are the topical issues, for example, those things that are in my postbag. Second will be the quarterly performance report. The third aspect will be identifying disproportionality. And then the final part will be Her Majesty's Inspector of Constabulary and their reports and the implications for Avon and Somerset. Given that this is the first time that we've done this, it may not be perfect. And in the spirit of continuous improvement in mind, I very much welcome your feedback on issues that are discussed in this meeting or indeed the format of the meeting itself. Before we move on to the agenda, I'd like to thank everybody who has made this work today. It isn't just a happening, it's taken a lot of effort from a team, and I also want to thank the Chief Constable and your team for supporting this and making it work. So I'm going to move to the first topic, which is what is in my postbag, and I've picked out one item, and this is male violence against women and girls. And it's an important theme, and it's coming through with my engagements with the public in the postbag, on emails, and on social media. Victims are telling me that they want better support, and the public want to be reassured that the police are committed to this. Tackling this is a strategic priority for me, and something that we as a society must all play our collective part in, and I'll come back to that. In my police and crime plan, I specifically look at domestic abuse, sexual offences, stalking and harassment. I have been bold in recognising this in my plan, that male violence against women and girls is both the cause and consequence of gender inequality. These crimes are disproportionately perpetrated by men against women, so that this is where I want the police service to focus on in something that we must all be able to talk about. That doesn't, however, mean that there aren't male victims in domestic violence as well, and that's something that we will address later, but I've also visited an extremely good charity, Mankind, that addresses this. We simply have to start with prevention by addressing the actions of the offender if we're going to make any difference at all here. More of the same clearly isn't working, and prevention is core to my entire police and crime plan, and I really want to hear today what the police are going to do to help this. There is a significant opportunity for an impact here with the communities of Avon and Somerset, both in scale and impact. And I was absolutely horrified when I first started in this job to hear that last year there were over 22,000 cases of domestic abuse reported. These were reported crimes to Avon and Somerset. This equates to over 70% of all recorded crime. And yet it still does not give the true scale of the harm, because we know there are a lot of cases that are not reported to the police. This sadly is daily business, daily harm, daily suffering. Behind these statistics are individuals from all walks of life whose pain we read in headlines. Since becoming the PCC, residents, support workers and survivors are taking time to share their stories with me of how the police could do better. As I said, my plan is ambitious, and I believe the police can improve both attitudes, procedures, and ultimately their service to residents of Avon and Somerset. And as an illustrative point here, the Chief Constable has led the way with Operation Bluestone, and some of this I know you will explain later. But beyond this, while criminal consequences of violence against women and girls are for the police to investigate, the causes and lasting effect affect all of us, meaning that we need a collaborative approach with partners and communities, and it's something that I'm encouraging the development of within the local police and crime plans. In other words, where do we get together to look at perhaps influence society through education about what healthy relationships look like and what to do if you're not in a healthy relationship and how we go about that. So I'm now going to come on to my first set of questions, Chief Constable. How will you translate the embedded local National Police Chiefs Council and the College of Policing's Violence Against Women and Girls Outcomes and Performance Framework that was published in December of last year?
Okay, thank you. As you said, I'm leading Operation Bluestone. I'm the national lead for adult sexual offences, and what that does is it gives me a seat around the table of the National Policing Gold Group, set up to tackle violence against women and girls. So I think I can both influence the national plan and make sure that it's implemented successfully locally. As Chief Constable, it's really making it a priority. The person who leads the police aspect of making this change is my Deputy Chief Constable, and Nick is going to set out in a second some of the things that she is doing to put scrutiny and governance around it. But I set the culture and tone as the Chief Constable, so through my communications with staff, blogs, engagements, conversations, I'm making this a very, very big priority. Looking to the wider system, tomorrow we bring together our first Violence Against Women and Girls Summit with a range of different partners to make the societal change as well. So as a Chief Constable, it's making it a priority. And I'll turn to Nikki now to talk about how she's making the policing aspects live within Avon and Somerset.
Thank you. So I would certainly say there's almost nothing more important at the moment. The force is in a really strong position with Sarah's national role. But what I have done as the force lead, and I have to say, most forces give it to somebody a bit more junior. I'm probably one of the only or the few deputies that lead on this for forces, and that demonstrates how important we see this. But I'm involved in the national and regional groups on this, and what we've done so far is we've taken the national strategy and we've developed a local Avon and Somerset strategy that reflects that national strategy, and really importantly a delivery plan that's going to see action happening. We're focusing on the three main national areas, which is improving confidence from the public, relentless pursuit of perpetrators, and then also creating safer spaces. So the really good work that the Chief has been doing in respect of adult sexual offences, it's focused very much around the most serious rape, but we're taking the learning from that and we're applying it to the way that we respond, investigate, domestic abuse. We're working really closely with partners, and that's one of the things that I wanted to emphasise actually. The police cannot solve this on our own. We are absolutely reliant on working in partnership. So in respect of that perpetrator focus, increasing the number of cases that go through the criminal justice system, working really closely with the Crown Prosecution Service and other members of the criminal justice system to make sure that we increase the number of people going in front of the court, if that's appropriate for the case. So really close partnership with criminal justice partners, but much wider than that. So the summit tomorrow brings together partners from across Avon and Somerset geography, and we're looking at ways that we can better respond, we can better safeguard victims, and we can better prevent these type of offences. So local authorities, for example, will be really involved in the creating safer places, looking at strategic hotspots for this type of crime, using our data to see where these offences are happening, and then working together to design them out so that we prevent them happening in the first place. We're also engaging really closely with our communities. We're not expecting to design this on our own. We want to listen to communities. What service do they want? What's their priority in this area? We've recently really engaged and reinvigorated our women's IAG, which spans the force area to really understand the issues affecting women and younger girls. So huge amount going on. We're investing in this area. So in our investigations, we're increasing the number of skilled investigators we have, but also in making sure that we eradicate any poor behaviour within the force, within our employees. So looking at our misconduct procedures and making sure that we resource those as well to give confidence to our public. So a huge amount coming on. I really look forward to probably updating you over the next few months about how it develops. But I'll probably leave it there for now.
Well, Deputy Chief Constable, thank you for that. And quite a lot of that was about procedures. And we'll deal with the misogyny piece in the force as a separate issue. But what about systemic prevention? How do we hardwire prevention beyond designing out dark corners in cities? And actually, I don't know what the percentage is of crimes that are committed in those dark corners of violence against women and girls. My gut feel is that a lot of this is domestic abuse. This is inside the house, is not out. So whilst that is good, of course, we need to reduce all of it. How do we, as I said in the introduction, how do we work on the process of preventing it happening in the first place?
So, well, I'll just say a really big part of it is the perpetrator focus. Sadly, many of these offenders are repeat offenders, so we need to absolutely track them down and investigate them and bring them to justice quickly to prevent them reoffending. So that will be a big part of it. But sorry, I interrupted, sir.
And that's what Nicky's just said is, I think, where the policing role, the core of it sits. However, it's a whole systems issue. This is a societal problem. The very fact that we're talking about it is a positive. You know, it starts with attitudes from a very early age. So the HMIC FRS last year were tasked by the Home Secretary to do a review of violence against women and girls, and the conclusion was this is a whole systems issue and it needs a whole systems approach. There is a role for policing in it, but it's the policing's role is within a range of strategic partnerships working together. And whilst Nicky is very much driving what policing has to do within the force, I see my role is setting a tone, but also brokering and convening with the role of the Police and Crime Commissioner, strategic partnerships. Now, in some of those, we have a very clear prominent role, so safer spaces, the local authority, ourselves, the premises themselves. In others, there may be more of a lesser role, but an equally important role, properly targeted. So I'm thinking in education and schools as well. So I think this is a societal problem. We need to use our influence and exercise our influence to be able to convene those partnerships and work together, which is the ambition behind the summit. It's to bring a range of different people together, but not just as a one-off, but to actually make a commitment to systematic change, so that we return to year on year to make differences for young women or babies who are born today. When they're young women, we don't want them experiencing some of those statistics that we started out with today.
Chief, thank you for that. I mean, I was very taken from the point of view of education of two videos. One was I think it was Police Scotland, who produced a video of "Don't Be That Man," and I think it tracked from a wolf whistle through to an assault, and how to recognise that and stop it and call it out if you're around it. And do you have any, before you answer, I'll move on to the next one. And the second video that I think my daughter who was at school saw endlessly was about consent and drinking cups of tea, which I thought was extremely sensible and useful. What are we doing within the force and my office to bring that power of our comms and information together to help support this activity?
Well, one strong, tangible example of how we're trying to change attitudes and influence society is the documentary, which I think was a fairly brave and groundbreaking documentary.
Well, you were very courageous, being a single focus for government there at that point.
The part of my role, with my national role, and Avon in Somerset creates an opportunity with your support and the support of the Chief Officer Group to bring that scrutiny in, enables us to raise public awareness about these issues. And so Rape, Who's on Trial, was the name of the documentary, was one aspect of that. What was really powerful though was the debate that followed, because that debate that followed enabled us to talk about these issues. That's got national prominence, and these issues being talked about in a much more evolved, mature way, and changes happening as a result of it. So Avon in Somerset, one of our ingredients, if you like, of the kind of force we want to be is incredibly transparent and open about these challenges and having courageous conversations about them. So bravery like that starts a conversation. We are keen to do that in other ways where others haven't been yet. But the Police Scotland documentary was powerful too, because it showed the power of the male in male violence against women and girls, and men standing up and being clear that this does not represent me. And I think the fact that we do that, we do both of those things together as a female chief and a male PCC sends a very positive message as well. I don't underestimate in some of this as well the power of the police uniform and male role models and the natural power and authority that they carry. And so the work that Nikki is doing is actually embracing he for she, male role models, talking about these issues and being proactively involved in the conversation. Because if we can do that, we send a positive message within our force, but we send a very positive message outside of our force as well.
Well, if I may then move on to a subject that you raised earlier on and you've just alluded to, how are we making sure that misogyny has no place in the constabulary?
Clearly misogyny has no place in the constabulary. I mean, there are a range of different things that are going on at the moment, from increasing the capability and capacity of our counter-corruption unit and our professional standards unit. It's well known within policing that something that we call abuse of position for sexual purpose is a significant threat to public confidence, and so how we deal with those instances, which are small but significant when it involves a police officer, are dealt with robustly. But we're also having, well, again, what I call courageous conversations in the workforce to find out how people are feeling. And what we hear, and Nikki has been long our gender lead for this, is that for some women in our organisation, they are made to feel uncomfortable. And that cannot be. We have an aspiration to be the most inclusive police force in the UK, because we want people to feel comfortable and perform well at work. So we are looking and having conversations using the support of an external agency to understand the barriers to people standing up, to remove those barriers, to provide support and advocacy, so that we can challenge some of these things. And the third element is to, obviously, as I've said before, is to call upon our male colleagues to get into this space and to stand up and to call out the behaviour of peers. So a range of different initiatives.
Chief Constable, I'm going to ask two more questions on the subject before we move on. The first is, I'm a great believer in leadership education and management training. How are we revising what we do as far as giving that education to our new leaders, our junior leaders, to make sure that they understand how to deal with misogyny and that it is not acceptable, both directly in the workplace, but also, for example, if there's a social event that they go to?
We have in the Constabulary the Leadership Academy, which is a significant investment and a statement of intent of how important leadership is in driving cultural change. I've alluded to our aspiration for inclusion. There are two aspects that I see incredibly important in that. One is our attitudes towards women and misogyny, and the other is our attitudes towards race and disproportionality as well. So the Leadership Academy is building leadership programs. We already have them, but building leadership programs that absolutely drive that cultural change that we need to see. So that's supported by the questions we ask in our promotion processes, what we recognise as good performance, what we see and how we talk about what the learning when we do have these instances that are high profile, where we have found out things that are wrong, and how we talk about that afterwards. So I fully agree with you that leadership is the key to driving this.
Well, not for today, but perhaps another one of these performance boards. I'd very much like you to give specific training objectives which are in the Leadership Academy in those specific courses that refer to this, particularly the misogyny piece. Now, the statistics around Avon and Somerset in the wider area are around clearing up of and prosecuting rape cases are not good. We have seen a decline over the last 3 years from 10.4% to 8.9%. And Avon and Somerset have a much lower rate of rape offences compared to other forces. What are you doing to address that and make sure that we are doing better?
I think those figures actually refer to violence against women more generally, but notwithstanding, the conviction and detection rates nationally for rape are not where they need to be, which is why I've stepped forward to lead the charge to improve them. There are a number of things going on there. There's increased reporting of violence against women and girls offences, but also rape offences. I think that's a very good thing. It does make the challenge of the percentage of solving more challenging, but that's a good challenge to have. There's also increased recording. One thing that you as Commissioner have been made very clear is that we know what the scale of the problem is. So we've done a massive amount to increase the accuracy of crime recording. Much of that is to be found in the violence against women and girls basket of crimes, things like harassment or repeat offences that we identify when people report once. They tell us about a history of things. When it comes to the outcome rates, though, against that growing number, we have maintained our performance on domestic abuse, on stalking and harassment, but on rape, the specific one, we have seen significant improvement. I think we've moved from 2 percentage points up to 5.8%, which actually puts us in a really strong position nationally. That doesn't sound good, I know. We've done that through Operation Bluestone. So Operation Bluestone is a completely new approach to investigating and tackling rape.
Perhaps you'd like to explain it in a nutshell.
Absolutely.
For
It's a recognition that something needs to change. So it's a collaboration between a police force and the leading academics in the field. And it looks at the international evidence base for what could work in this type of offence from other jurisdictions, but also other crime types. And it uses a 5-pillar model, which focuses on very suspect-based investigations, disrupting repeat perpetrators, having a very, what we call procedural justice approach to victim engagement. So victims feel involved and engaged and supported through the process of reporting. But it also looks at building specialism, supporting the development and the well-being of those who investigate rape, but also being very, very focused on what the data is telling us. What we've done in Avon and Somerset is worked with those academics to test ourselves against those pillars, find where there are areas for improvement and start to implement them. We are about halfway down the path of implementing them because we have to rebuild our specialist capability. And we have to do it in partnership with the Crown Prosecution Service, and we've had to rebuild some relationships there. But we have done really successfully, and I think we are seen as a beacon, if you like, nationally. But what that means is that we've seen much better early engagement with the Crown Prosecution Service, identifying cases and their strengths in cases and working around them quickly. And now we're starting to see much more referrals to them for charging decisions and much higher volume of charges. Whilst the percentage points sound small, actually in real terms that's double over the period that the team have been in place. Such are the green shoots that the Bluestone model is being rolled out to 4 other Pathfinder forces around the UK to go through the same process with a view to shaping a national operating model for these offences. As the Deputy Chief Constable has said, we think, working with the academics, that this is a model not just for rape and serious sexual offences, but for violence against women and for girls offences more generally, certainly domestic abuse. So we're actually already thinking about how we reshape, with the investment policing is seeing, our whole investigative function around the learning we're getting from Bluestone. So good progress despite increased reports and increased recording on rape, and I think it's a signal of what can be achieved and the potential we have to make a significant difference in this area.
Well, you'll be not surprised to know that I will be keeping a very close eye on this with my team, and I will want to see those percentages increase significantly. But I'll also want to hear of the lessons identified from the other forces who are going through the equivalent, which I think is called Opsoteria, and what lessons we can learn, because the Avon and Somerset don't have the monopoly on good ideas, and others may indeed have successful techniques and procedures that we should follow. Well, thank you both for answering that. That completes the first section of this, and we're now going to move on to the second section, which is the quarterly performance report. And before we start, I just wondered, Chief Constable, if you'd like to just give a little brief about why we have these statistics and where they come from.
Okay, these statistics are framed around a series of outcomes that are both sought by the Home Secretary, but also form part of the beating crime plan. Also, we have obviously the priorities within the policing crime plan. There is a lot of read across between the 3 sources, but they add up into a series of measures that are collected here in the PowerPoint. Some of them are collected in each police force area as part of a standard reporting, and some of them are additional for Avon and Somerset because they reflect the policing crime plan priorities. and it's how we measure performance over the year and progress.
Thank you. And legislation requires me, as the Police and Crime Commissioner, to publish certain information. This is set out in the Specified Information Order, which was amended last year. And I now have a duty to publish a quarterly report showing the contribution of Avon and Somerset Police in achieving improvements against those national policing priorities. The first half of the performance report covers those national priorities. However, the second part of the report provides a similar overview, but in relation to my own police and crime plan. In particular, this time, the area of focus is priority 1 of my police and crime plan, which is preventing and fighting crime. Now, turning to the report itself, before I get into the questions that I'm going to ask you, I thought it was worth reflecting that in Avon and Somerset, there are relatively low levels of homicide and serious violence. No homicide, however, is good, and we need to focus on that and serious violence. So the first question is on homicide, Chief Constable. So point 2 of the planned actions talks about homicide suppression plan, which, as you will know from the policing minister, is one of his big focuses. What are the timescales around this? And at this early stage, is there anything that you'd like to highlight?
Well, we do have an existing homicide suppression plan. It's owned for Avon in Somerset by the head of the Major Crime Investigation Team. It follows the National Homicide Strategic Plan, which focuses on 4 areas, which people will be familiar with from the way we deal with counter-terrorism. So pursue, prepare, protect and prevent. So it's not just looking at, in a very broad way, at the root causes. That has been recently reviewed and it's been refreshed. There is a process going on nationally to update the National Homicide Problem Profile, which will give us a clearer picture of the current trends on homicide nationally and locally. That will generate a further refresh. However, I think we're at a point where homicide suppression needs to be lifted up a level beyond the head of the Major Crime Investigation Team, because violence against women and girls, organised crime, antisocial behaviour, neighbourhood disputes, indeed some of the offenders we manage within our offender management units, all managed properly prevent homicide. And so there is a need to bring some additional oversight and focus, largely through the lens of serious violence, on the prevention. And so we are going through a process now of bringing together all of those different strands into a strategy, which will sit under one of our Assistant Chief Constables who currently has the lead for serious violence. There are 2 additional pieces of work that are going on locally to support that. One is when we do have a homicide, they as we say, they are lower in number in Avon and Somerset than other parts or comparable parts of the country. But it's really important that very early doors we start to debrief, to look at opportunities, insights, which might help prevent another one. So that early debriefing of what's happened here. The second is deploying one of our strengths, which is our insight and our intelligence and our risk models. It's very difficult to predict a murder. It would be great if we could, or a murder victim, or a murderer. But what we have got in Avon and Somerset are a series of models based around risk, harm, threat, that can give us some insights as to where there is escalation and where there is increased vulnerability, so that we are able to intervene more early. So we are very much in line with the national direction in this, but we are looking to bring together all our local insight and knowledge as well.
I'm very interested in that last piece, Chief Constable, about the data that allows us some form of predicting model. Practically, what do the local police forces in those areas where that model shows a higher vulnerability or some other aspect, what do they do as a consequence?
I mean, in our force, I can't speak for other forces, and I don't know if they're unlikely in some of them to have the tools, because we have been developing them and maturing them. And there is a great deal of acceptance that Avon and Somerset Police is a leader in this field. But with those models, the Perpetrator Focus model that we've talked about in the context of violence against women and girls creates an opportunity for us to intervene, prevent, deter, disrupt. So if we see someone escalating, they may be a victim, that might be an opportunity for our Lighthouse Safeguarding Unit to work with other partners to strategise how do we reduce the risk that this person may be of becoming a victim. If it's someone who's on the perpetrator side, what's our opportunity? Maybe it's neighbourhood policing, it could be offender management, it could be an investigation that we deploy to intervene. Our aim here is to prevent things escalating, to protect, but also to prevent someone escalating. Often with criminal behaviour, there are other factors that are driving that we can remove.
Could you give some examples?
There may be alcohol abuse, there may be drug addiction, there may be mental health issues, there may be housing and employment issues that are driving people down a route of crime. So all of those root cause issues, with either as a force alone or indeed usually with partners, we can work to resolve some of those issues and those drivers of criminal behaviour.
You mentioned in that discussion an organisation called Lighthouse.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you could explain what Lighthouse is.
Lighthouse Safeguarding Unit is a unit that does largely two things. One is it's our core hub for safeguarding, and that means it's the hub which engages with other partners who may have a safeguarding concern that they refer to us about someone, or where an officer comes across someone who may be vulnerable. Lighthouse is our hub for sharing information, for assessing risk and identifying ways to reduce that risk. Its second aspect is its support of victims of the most serious crimes, but also victims who are vulnerable, intimidated or persistently targeted, to make sure they get enhanced support and service through...
Just very quickly, sorry to interrupt, is it police staff, is it police officers, or is it a mixture of both?
It's predominantly police staff made up of safeguarding professionals, but also victim and witness care officers. And there's a lot of crossover between those two cohorts that they work with, which is why the unit works together to make sure we're completely joined up in supporting those who are victims and at risk of re-victimisation.
Great, thank you. And linked to homicide, serious violence, point 5 of the planned action talks about responding to emergency demand. However, the highest priority grade 1 response is still only within the agreed timescale of 70% of calls. How will you address this? How will you try and improve this?
Okay, well, I want to give some context first and then what we're doing to improve. So it's worth saying that some of our most similar family group forces, their compliance or their attainment here is around 40 to 50%. So we are not an outlier. And when we actually look in serious violence specifically over the last 10 weeks, I'm talking about wounding or grievous bodily harm here. Our attendance time is 11.1 minutes against a target of 15. So at a median level. So we are getting to the most serious bits of violence. our best ever performance in this area during the period of the first lockdown of COVID, when our demand went down by 40% overall, was 82%. So that gives a sense of context of where we're at. We are seeing some growing pains at the moment as we uplift in officer numbers, and in real terms that means we have inexperienced officers, and that includes a deficit in skills in this context, response driving for instance. While they're being tutored, they are in twos instead of single crewed, which reduces some of our capacity, and because they're learning, dealing with incidents is slower, and the part of their training means that for periods of time they are abstracted to university. What that means is our capacity is temporarily, and I would emphasise temporarily suppressed. We see our first graduation in June, and with that first graduation we start to see our potential being unlocked as that experience and that capacity is unleashed, and that will improve 6 weeks on 6 weeks as intakes come through. So we do hope to see us returning closer to that best ever performance. So there's still some work to be done here on core grading accuracy. So when we're measuring ourselves, we are sometimes calling things and retaining things as high priority when they no longer are, and we're measuring against that. But that work is in train.
And I'm pleased specifically, obviously, that work is in train, but again, it's about prevention. So whilst we can respond, or I say we, you, the constabulary can respond within the allotted time, the issue for me is how do we stop serious violence starting? How do we get to those people who might want to perpetrate serious violence and stop them doing it in the first place?
Absolutely, I completely agree. Response is just one element of this. So this is where our perpetrator focus comes in. It starts with preventing and deterring, and that can often be with young people on the edges of criminality. This is where the investment we're making and the police and crime your officers are making in violence reduction units, and our partner agencies in those violence reduction units are incredibly important in the prevent and deter. When offences are happening, it's really important that we catch, convict and disrupt, and that's where what we're learning from the Bluestone approach comes. And when we've done that catch, convict and disrupting, it's really important we work on the root causes of why people reoffend, which is where that work with alcohol, treatment, and mental health, etc. fall in. So for us, perpetrator focus is an absolute core strategy which will seek to prevent and reduce and mitigate, as well as the work we want to do to when it happens, and if you're a victim of a wounding, us getting there quickly is potentially going to save your life. So it's really important we still get and respond there too.
I'm now going to move on to two linked subjects, rural crime and antisocial behaviour. As you know, I'm particularly interested in rural crime in all aspects of it, and it seems that recorded offences have dropped to almost half compared with 2 years ago, and I'd really like to understand why you think that's happened. But secondly, with antisocial behaviour, which is a big part of my post bag, it seems there have been fewer incidents this year compared to last, but the victim satisfaction has declined. So what I really want to ask is, why do you think rural crime has gone down by about half? And secondly, around antisocial behaviour, which happens everywhere, why do you think there are fewer incidents, but why is the satisfaction of those victims that suffer from it not improved?
Okay, if I can take rural crime first, and I think what I'm going to draw out are what I think are hypotheses that are contributing. I'm not sure it's the whole answer, but I would say there are two things that I can point to. One is around what we call rural crime and the flagging and identification of it. I think our accuracy and knowledge within our call handling units who deal with these, when things are reported to us, hasn't been where it has been in the past. And I think the period of working from home during the pandemic has, and as there is high staff turnover in those teams. So we did do an assessment of accuracy with the rural crime team recently. We identified that, so that's why I can point to it, is we are sometimes over-recording and sometimes under-recording, and it's not an accurate figure. We've done some work now to improve that situation with each team within the unit, 24/7, having experts who can make sure we do that, and we check and test. So we know our figures now are accurate. The second, so we've got a baseline that we can measure. The second aspect of it is we have had some success with our rural crime team at dismantling and disrupting an organised crime group that specialises within our force area in the theft of agricultural machinery, and that has suppressed the numbers to some extent. We still know that rural crime is underreported because we hear that a lot, and various reasons are given for that. Farmers are too busy to report, or they have no confidence in us to do anything about it. That has been said for some time. I don't think there's any evidence to say that has got worse in any way or contributed. In fact, the rural crime team has really strong engagement with the rural communities. We have really strong feedback about their engagement. And we're seeing increased uptake as a result of that in things like Horse Watch and Farm Watch. So I don't think that has changed and is the factor. I don't think it's confidence. We do need to build more confidence. It's some of those other things. With our investment in officer numbers, we are going to make a small uplift to our rural crime team. And that's going to enable us to increase some of that engagement, as well as be more effective working across neighbourhood teams in dismantling and disrupting some of those who target the rural community. So those are some of the factors I think there for rural crime. When it comes to antisocial behaviour, what we have with antisocial, it's great that numbers have gone down. But victim satisfaction, it's not great if it's where it is. We categorise antisocial behaviour in three ways in Avon and Somerset at the moment: personal, environmental, nuisance. And I think that explains but just by the name on the tin. With personal antisocial behaviour, we classify very carefully because we want to make sure we're not missing a crime. We speak to and call back all of those victims after we've responded to tell them what's happened. Giving updates is very key to victim satisfaction. And we do risk assessments as well to support. We don't do that with environmental or nuisance antisocial behaviour. We have done in the past when we were seen actually by our inspectorate as a high performing team in this area. Now that we have the capacity coming back into policing, we need to return to doing the same as we're doing for personal ASB for those other two types. So we have a lead for antisocial behaviour. The plans to do that, to introduce what we call our new service standard, are well advanced. And our hope is that we will be able to roll out that new enhanced approach from, I think it's July, which is the National Week for Antisocial Behaviour. So we are on track to improve our victim satisfaction through increased follow-up and contact and risk assessment.
Well, I'm very pleased to hear that. I mean, going around my engagement, there are two really big issues that people tell me around this subject is lack of feedback. People, they report and then they don't get any feedback, and so they don't think anything's been done about the subject. And I think lack of that visibility of police officers and PCSOs at things like parish council meetings and town council meetings, where they don't have to go every time, but they do need to come regularly, and that engagement with the public gives such a reassurance, and particularly around antisocial behaviour.
I fully accept both of those points. So in terms of getting feedback, this new approach will absolutely address that, and it will sit within neighbourhood policing, and that has another effect of neighbourhood policing being clear of every single piece antisocial behaviour report that happens. In terms of presence or visibility, noting, as you say, that there's no expectation on presence, actual physical presence at every meeting, some kind of footprint of neighbourhood policing, and that's an expectation that that we have set for our neighbourhood policing teams, and that's something that our senior leaders in neighbourhood policing are looking to embed and make happen. It certainly is the intention, and we need to make it happen. As we grow as an organisation, the ability to make that happen becomes more and more achievable.
Well, let's move on to a linked subject, which is neighbourhood policing. As you know, I've said for some time that I want this to be the white hot tip of the spear as far as how the people perceive the police. Because if the neighbourhood teams can prevent the crime happening in the first place, we don't need so many people running around with blue lights. And by that visible presence that we were talking about earlier on, there are three things that come out of that. There's the reassurance aspect to the public. The second thing is there's clearly a deterrent aspect, because criminals don't want to go anywhere near where police are patrolling regularly. And then the third is the intelligence, picking up that valuable piece from the ground, which is why I see neighbourhoods as so important. Residential burglary and robbery rates are higher than most similar forces in this area. Do you understand why this is, and what are we going to do to tackle it to make it better?
So there are particular, we monitor the trends around residential burglary and robbery, as indeed the areas of neighbourhood crime, very closely. So we see changes very much. So certainly when it comes to residential burglary, until November last year, we were tracking alongside our most similar family. And then we saw a rise in offences between November and January, largely concentrated in Bristol. And what we did was problem solve, which is precisely what you say, with neighbourhood policing having a part in that. But we also, using our Operation Remedy capability and our offender management approach, so Perpetrator Focus, we're able to get that back on track now. So we do see spikes where those things happen. There's a particular operation that our Remedy team have been doing that have been successful in doing that. There's a similar story around robbery as well. We monitor it, and we do what we can effectively to be targeted through problem solving, but also proactivity onto those problems and get them back on track. So robbery actually is now back on track and tracing with our most similar family. There's been a 20% reduction. Can we do better? Absolutely. And one of the key core elements of our decisions around where we place the 456 additional officer posts that we are going to receive in Avon and Somerset by the end of next March is absolutely to back up that neighbourhood policing approach. We're one of the forces, we were lucky that actually we maintained, certainly at Sergeant, PCSO and Constable level, our neighbourhood resources through periods of austerity. Now we're in a position to add extra strength and power to them, and that will come in the form of some investment in early intervention, but also some extra investment in our Operation Remedy, force-wide, proactive capability, based within the neighbourhood policing team, department, but also in each local policing area, within the neighbourhood teams, small proactive teams as well. So I'm adding power and strength, combined with what I've talked about, our ability to understand trends, what's happening, hotspots, linked series, prolific offenders, and to be able to bring to bear in support of neighbourhood policing those additional resources and the other resources of the force as well. So I want to see real progress on reducing actually everything within the neighbourhood crime basket. I do want to see prolific offenders brought to justice, but actually with you, Commissioner, actually reducing those offences is what's the most important thing.
Just because we've got to move on to the next subject, but there are two things. You've mentioned remedy a number of times. You also mentioned problem-solving approach. Could you just explain very succinctly what both of those are?
So Operation Remedy is a roughly 100-strong team of officers and some staff who at the moment focus solely on drugs, on serious violence and knife crime. And they create, and residential burglary, clearly that's what we're talking about. And they are capable of being deployed according to intelligence where we need them most. In terms of problem solving, that's a term we use to identify and diagnose the root causes of a problem, as well as the symptoms of the problem, and to identify what partners, both internal and external, we need to bring around the table to solve the root cause problems, the root causes as well as the symptoms of the problems themselves. Quite often that will be looking at things like target hardening, as well as going after the offender and supporting the victim.
I'm really pleased to hear you say partners, because in a lot of areas, from my little knowledge of the subject, partners are so important, and the police can't do it all themselves. You've got to work with those partners. And are there any particular highlights of success working with partners, particularly in the neighbourhoods, that you want to just talk about? You've got 3 minutes.
I mean, one particular area that we've worked really hard on are things like demand that comes from hospitals, accident and emergency units. One of the things that we can do with our data is identify what are what the places, who are the people who cause the most demand upon our services, because when the demand is being used, it's not there to deploy to those other things we've talked about. So we use that proactively within neighbourhood policing. So each neighbourhood policing officer will be able to identify their beat, who are the top 10 people on their beat, or where are the top 10 places, and they will be working with their local partners to do that. So there will be numerous examples every day of success of doing that. And in fact, we've won national awards for different aspects of this.
Well, thanks, Chief Constable, for that. But I didn't know we won a national award, so that's
dementia pendants, and the demand coming from people who are missing because of dementia.
Well, yeah, that's very interesting. I'd like to go back to that at another time. So I want to now change focus completely to a new section in this board, and this is the Identifying Disproportionality report. And we recently announced the publication of an independent report into identifying disproportionality in the criminal justice system. So that's the entire system, you could say, from the police at one end to the probationary service at the other, including courts, including prisons. And I just wondered whether, Chief, you could give us a little background as to why this came about. Okay,
this report was actually, I think, commissioned in 2018-19 by your predecessor, Commissioner, and it followed the national report from David Lammy looking at disproportionality on the criminal justice system, which had been commissioned by the then Home Secretary. There was a real ambition and appetite across the Avon and Somerset criminal justice partners to understand what that meant locally and to do something meaningful. Why? There are rates of confidence in the criminal justice system, in the police, amongst members of our black and minority ethnic communities, and black communities in particular, which are significantly less than for the general population, actually, sometimes 20% less. So it feels like a burning platform, and that was the genesis of the work. Over that time, lots and lots of data has been gathered and crunched and analysed, culminating in a report which sets out starkly the local challenges with a series of recommendations, and very many of them, on what we need to do across a range of different thematics, a number of them which sit with the police, but as you say, but also with partners in other criminal justice agencies like the Crown Prosecution Service and the judiciary.
Thank you. And my enormous thanks to Desmond Brown, who authored it and put it together, and the rest of the team, some of which are here, who helped make it happen. The aim of this approach is to explain or to reform in areas where there are disproportionality and racial disparity, where those have been identified. I think this is absolutely crucial to policing legitimacy and also criminal justice. I'm the chair of the local criminal justice board, and it's made up of all the partner agencies delivering criminal justice in our area. In that role, with the support of my office, I will be treating the legacy of this report as a priority, and hence it is on this board. And I know you, Chief Constable, also regard this area of work as a key priority because of that legitimacy piece. And I'm very pleased to hear that you volunteered to lead the subgroup from all those agencies, turning those lessons identified into action. So those recommendations in the report into action. And I think we're leading the way nationally in tackling this issue. What I actually end up wanting to do with this is, instead of it being special and different and a high priority, I want us to get to a point where this is normal business. All of those recommendations are normal. It's normal jogging, and everybody understands that. So there aren't all these things that are suddenly flying in left or right field because it's different, because we haven't got that piece right. And I really want to ask you two questions. The first is, can you give me an overview of how you are responding in detail to those recommendations around the police element? And the second question is, how are you going to bring together those partners in your role as the chair of that subcommittee, which is a start-finish group, and make sure they deliver on those recommendations?
Okay. So if I just reflect on, I'm absolutely passionate about this area, because I think this is critical, as like violence against women and girls, to confidence in the police and confidence in the criminal justice system, and that's something I hold really dear. That's why I volunteered to take on this role. As far as the police response to these recommendations goes, I've appointed one of my assistant chief constables to lead this. That's been for a very strong reason, because I think it's cross-cutting for the force, and as you say, this has to be business as usual, but it should have been business as usual a long time ago, and I think we need this level of engineering and scrutiny and governance and senior drive to make it business as usual. So we're going to have to engineer this. One of the assistant chief constables, Will White, has been appointed to lead the recommendations. He's already brought together senior leads for each of the themes that reflect on policing, so out of court disposal, stop and search. There is a named owner on every single one of those recommendations, and there is a action plan being put together, which will be assessed on red, amber and green of how we're doing it against them. And it won't be just a case of have we done the recommendation. It will be, what do the dials say on the data? What's the lived experience response from those who are living this? So as far as the police goes, this is alongside the work that we talked about before on violence against women and girls, two of our biggest priorities within that field of culture and our internal culture, and it's got senior leadership on it. In terms of there are resources that that are there to support him in doing that. So project management and improvement, as I say, without engineering, this needs to be driven. At the cross partner level, that Assistant Chief Constable will obviously report into me. You and I have written jointly to the Chief Exec levels in our partner agencies, criminal justice, local authority, to invite similarly senior representation to be part of the work that and the work group that I chair. We're planning for an initial workshop to agree together, because I think co-design is really important here. Aims, objectives, outcomes, ways of working, governance and scrutiny arrangements. Again, I want those outcomes to be more than we've done all of our recommendations. They need to be, what do the dials show on disproportionality and stop and search, for instance, but also what is the lived experience of people from our communities and talking to them of those changes. It's okay implementing things, but if they don't bring change, we need to do this and do it properly. We will be, we've appointed a programme manager, the programme manager who has worked on building the report to help us coordinate across those agencies. And we've already started to put in place the data stream arrangements, because data is going to be really important here to show change and progress. I think the most important aspect I'd want to emphasise is how we're going to encourage scrutiny. Clearly we have the scrutiny and our accountability to the local criminal justice board, and actually from a police perspective to you through me in this meeting, but I think we need to have scrutiny from our communities. And I think it's very important that we have the lived experience voice and a loud voice within the working group. But I think that how we're scrutinised on our progress also needs to be through those who represent the community. So we're exploring how that can be. The Commission for Racial Equality in Bristol would be part of that. Our own independent advisory group framework would be another part of it. But I think it's important this is done in public and people see, and it's transparent, and it's not things that are done between senior people in statutory agencies who say they've made change. I don't want to stop being Chief Constable until this is done.
But, I will hold you to that, Chief Constable, as you know I will. Two things. I'm interested in that assurance piece from the community that it's working. And you talked about certain boards. Excuse me, I've got terrible hay fever, so if you hear me blowing my nose, crying and coughing, you'll know why. So the assurance around that community piece, and at the end of it, what good looks like. And what is that vision of the sunny uplands of what good looks like?
And I think that's the bit that the workshop will work through with those senior people, because it has to be a shared endeavour, and it needs to be co-designed together. But I think it's also very important there are very tangible measures of success that we can point to, not a green assessment, we've done our action. It has to be shown in. You started by talking about explain or reform. I think we need to explain and reform. I don't think we can fully explain some of these things yet, and it needs to be tangible to data that we can point to that has changed, but it has to be tangible in the sense of, and how we capture this is more more challenging, and we're going to have to be innovative in doing this, how we capture lived experience from our communities as well, of their feelings of out-of-court disposals or stop of search as well, their experiences of the criminal justice system. So we're going to have to be quite imaginative and creative in doing that too, and brave.
Yes, and that is a constant theme coming back. Creative, definitely. Courageous, absolutely. I'd also like to see agility in there as well. I think we'll stop on that particular section. When we come back to this, we'll start to review the success and where we're going with that at the next board. What I'd like to now move on to is the last section, so your last sprint to the final. Do have a drink. I haven't talked as much as you, but I'm quite dry on the throat. Her Majesty's Inspector of Constabulary and Fire and Rescue Services reports and recommendations. Could I ask you, Chief Constable, just to explain to all of us what that is? What are those reports?
Okay, so they are the Inspectorate of Policing as well as Fire and Rescue Service. And what does that? How do they conduct themselves? Their role is to conduct an assessment, a comprehensive assessment of each police force on its legitimacy, efficiency and effectiveness. That's called the PEAL programme. The Inspectorate also do themed inspections on a particular theme of policing. A most recent one would be the policing of protests. Those often don't apply to every police force. They will pick a series, maybe 6 or 7. They can do joint inspections with other inspectorates, and we have experienced that here in Avon and Somerset with inspections with Ofsted, by way of example, on children's safeguarding. And there can be directed one-off inspections. The report I alluded to earlier on violence against women and girls was directed by the Home Secretary to the Inspectorate. The Inspectorate do one other thing that the public may be aware of, and that's an annual report on policing, which is a compendium, if you like, of the insights that come from doing all of those things. And that's published annually by the Chief Inspector of Constabulary. Our role in working with the Inspectorate is to facilitate their work. So we share lots and lots of data. We give access to our premises, to our computer systems, sometimes with warning, sometimes with not. Having been inspected, we respond to recommendations that are highlighted to us. We also respond to recommendations that maybe come to Chief Constables arising from inspections that have been done of other police forces. There is the whole purpose behind the Inspectorate is to help us learn and improve. So the third responsibility we have is to be cognizant of the Inspectorate's work, to identify areas of good practice in other places and pick upon them and see if they can be solutions to our own problems as well.
I've taken with a quote that was often thrown at me as a soldier, which was, a wise man learns from his mistakes, a wiser person learns from somebody else's mistakes, and I think this applies here, of course. I, of course, play a role in overseeing your implementations of these recommendations. Now, I notice that a number of the recommendations are a year old. Why is this, and what are you doing to ensure those recommendations are addressed in a timely manner? Okay.
So in terms of why are they still hanging around, there are a range of different reasons. There was a time some years ago when the recommendations and the way they were framed were very broad and woolly, if I'm honest. So it was difficult to know when you had done them or when you hadn't, because they have an ongoing sense of do better training. That has improved with feedback over time. There are some recommendations that need national action before we can close them. It might be guidance from an MPCC National Police Chiefs Council lead or the College of Policing. It may require a change to a crime recording system, which is maintained by a number of different forces. So in this force we have niche as our crime recording system. If we want to make a change, we have to broker and negotiate that with the other forces. So some of them take some time. In the past, there also wasn't a real clarity of how they get closed. Can we close them and say, we've done it? Or does that have to be signed off, agreed by the inspectorate? That clarification has come more recently, that they absolutely do need to be signed off by the inspectorate, and how. And there is a process of several different checks and balances before that happens, and they will be done in the way that they can schedule their workload. As I've alluded to, they're already very busy with a programme of inspections. So all of those reasons are why. The last 12 months, we've wanted to get a real grip of where we are on all of our recommendations, and we've dug them all out and found them from the past. And we've put in place a recommendations scrutiny group under the leadership of the Chief of Staff. This reports into the Confidence and Legitimacy Committee, which Nikki, as the Deputy Chief Constable, chairs. And in the last 9 months since we took that place, we've seen real progress. There have been 9 steering groups in that time. 81 of those recommendations have been reviewed. 27 of them have been agreed, that we think they're done. They think that they can be agreed by the inspectorate themselves, and 27 of them are sitting with the inspectorate to make their decision that those are closed. So we have, as I said before, put some engineering in now to make sure that we can point to every single recommendation, say exactly where we are on it, and where we can give it back to the inspectorate to say, we've done it and here's the proof.
I'm very pleased to hear that, and I would like next time you come back to the board to ask how many of those recommendations that were made over a year ago are still outstanding. And I'd like to have the detail of that. So I just want to look at 2 reports. The fraud report, you won't be surprised at because of my national lead on economic and cybercrime, and road safety if we have time at the end. So my work as the economic and cybercrime lead is varied and vital, and I'm supported by my deputies James Thompson, Chair of the City of London Police Authority, and Andrew Dunbobbin, who is the Police and Crime Commissioner for North Wales. And during my election campaign, it was clear from constituents fraud was a concern, and it led me to take on this national portfolio. I'm committed to improving the response to fraud in both England and Wales, protecting those individuals and business, particularly SMEs, preventing victimisation, supporting the criminal justice system in this really difficult area, also looking at frauds perpetrated in charities, where there's a very grey area who's responsible for that. Sadly, fraud continues to grow and has affected a significant number of our constituents. It's probably now the most commonly experienced crime, with 4.4 million incidents in the Crime Survey of England and Wales for the year ending 2020. Fraud causes severe harm to victims, not only in their financial pocket, as we all know for anybody who's been done by fraud, but also in mental health. There are long-term financial implications when life savings are lost, and 74% of fraud victims report being emotionally impacted. And I'd like to just raise a couple of points on this. Many of the victims of fraud have told me that they have not received a good enough service from the police, as they are often directed to Action Fraud, which is a central organisation run by the City of London Police. What do you think, Chief Constable, could be done to ensure that fraud victims feel that they're being taken seriously from the first point of contact?
Okay, I mean, so all fraud victims are directed through Action Fraud. There is a service level agreement and a contract with Action Fraud. And we will, if service isn't where it should be, we will, for our victims in Avon and Somerset, we will work with the City of London Police, who lead nationally for fraud, to work with Action Fraud to improve. But in terms of what we can do, there are about 800 to 1,000 victims every month in Avon and Somerset who report.
Could you just reiterate that figure, please?
800 to 1,000 victims of fraud in Avon and Somerset every month reporting to Action Fraud. Now, Action Fraud will assess those reports, and where there are viable lines of inquiry, they will send that referral, that crime, to a police force or another law enforcement agency to investigate. And in making the decision, they will be largely offender-based. So they will send it to the police force where they think the offender is. If it's not clear, they will send it to the police force that's the most appropriate. Now, when they send one of those referrals to Avon and Somerset, 100% of those are allocated to investigation, and they will be investigated. But we'll also assess every victim for their vulnerability. As you say, vulnerability in fraud may be different than vulnerability in other types of crime, and the impacts on mental health in particular are understood, and the psychology used by the fraudsters is understood too. So where there is vulnerability, we will ensure that there is what we call a fraud protect service. We have dedicated officers and staff which can help keep people safe from further victimisation and help them deal with the impact and the trauma, and that might referral to other agencies as well. We also have access to the raw data on what's happening in Avon and Somerset, so we're also able to look for trends and hotspots, and that's another place, themes that we can direct our fraud protect and our cyber protect, if there's a cyber element, resources to try and be proactive at prevention and protection. So those are the things that are happening in Avon and Somerset with those referrals that we have. If they come back to us, we'll investigate, but all of them we're looking at for trends, and all of them we're assessing for vulnerability.
Well, in the short time that we have left, I just want to ask a follow-up question on that, and then one around road safety. A number of victims have approached me to say that Action Fraud have dismissed their case without allocating it to a police force, but also without investigating their cases. So how would they know whether there was a case worth investigating if they don't look at it, if they don't ask them any questions about the particular case? What do we do about those types of victims?
Well, we would look at the particular experience of those victims, and as I say, we have expectations and service level agreements as a force with Action Fraud, as the policing has with Action Fraud, to understand now the Action Fraud should review and assess every referral, and the reason that it happens, it's the only crime type that happens in that centralised way, is because they're looking for trends and hotspots and clues. There may be a clue on one crime that might solve another crime with a similar method being used. So that central point is very, very sensible, but if people's experience that they don't feel that they're being asked the right questions to be able to glean that information from them, then that doesn't sound as though it's in line with the service level agreement, and we will work with the City of London to make sure that gets looked into.
I think that's a very important point, and certainly there are a number of issues which my Deputy Chief of Staff has been dealing with, where that has been the case, that we really need to look at those cases that have just been dismissed seemingly out of hand, but there may be more behind that. I'd like to just turn, if I may, onto road safety and citizens in police. One of my favourite organisations is Community Speedwatch. I see this as a real Pelian principles of the police are the community, and the community in this case are the police. And I think they're a fantastic organisation alongside Neighbourhood Watch, Farm Watch and Horse Watch. What can we do to boost the support to them to make them even more effective?
I mean, I spent some time with Community Speedwatch on a couple of occasions, including recently, so I would completely echo your assessment of them, so much so that I came back and spoke to the superintendent responsible for road safety, quite excited about the opportunities of support. I was pleased to find that a number of those suggestions that I was suggesting had already been thought of and were in the process of happening. There is something about it's a huge network, and there is something about the support, the administration, the ability to communicate quickly that needs to be put in place, and that's something we're looking at in the central hub. We have a very small road safety team. It's small, it's perfectly formed, and it is the hub of a lot of national good practice. I think how we mobilise and fit Community Speedwatch is something that we can do better at and be great at, as we are with capturing dash cam footage and using intelligence and data. We do that really, really well. We need to do the same with Community Speedwatch. Your point about valuing is a really important aspect of that, and getting in contact really quickly when they need something is really important. So we're looking at enhancing the support and the hub around that, the Community Speedwatch network.
Chief Constable, thank you, and we will of course return to the subject fairly regularly, I can assure you. Deputy Chief Constable, thank you very much for supporting my team, also for all the support and the preparation, and the team behind the cameras that you can't see who put this together and made sure it ran incredibly smoothly. What I'd like as we go forward is there to be the equivalent of the actions that have come out of this meeting, so that we give the Chief Constable and her team proper time to be able to assess those questions to come back, so that we ask them at the next meeting, and that we follow up, and perhaps a RAG rating as they get turned into actions. And to all of you out in the public who are watching either live or recorded, thank you very much for taking part in this, albeit behind the camera. And I'd very much value your feedback as to how we ran this, if there can be changes, if there are changes to the slides that you saw supporting this, and any of the documentation to improve it for next time. As I said, this was the first time we ran it. It may be a bit clunky, and maybe a few issues that we need to address to improve it for next time. We want to constantly improve it. So to all of you, I'm going to give you 2 minutes back of your day, finish early, and say thank you all very much.